The Galactic Council chamber was not built for warnings. It was built for conquest, a cathedral of cold arrogance. Obsidian walls gleaming like sharpened glass. Floating thrones of gold and steel and above them, a ceiling etched with the names. Of every world they had crushed. One space near the top still waited, empty. That space was reserved for Earth. And today, they were ready to claim it. But before they could strike, the chamber received an unexpected visitor. Not a diplomat. Not an ambassador. A broken soldier. Varkin stood at the center of the council's circle, alone. His once armored frame slumped. With age and pain. One cybernetic arm twitched, sparking and damaged. A relic of wars long buried, his scales were dull. His spine slightly bent, but his eyes burned with something the council hadn't seen in centuries. Fear. The archspeaker leaned forward. His throne hissed with chrome smoke. Begin, old soldier. Varkin did not bow. He didn't need to. Came, he said, voice dry as dust, to warn you, again. A ripple of amusement passed through the chamber. Hums, smirks. The soft mockery of immortals who believe themselves untouchable. Admiral Visor leaned forward. Golden armor glowing beneath sterile white lights. His voice oozed sarcasm. We've heard your tales, veteran. Earthlings with sharpened sticks outwitting cruisers? Very dramatic. You mock what you don't understand, Varkin growled. And you always will, until they come for your eyes. In the dark. Visor raised a brow, half interested. Then enlighten us one last time. Varkin inhaled, a long breath, not to steady his body. But his memory, it was during the annexation push. We dropped into the Hun expanse, Earth's northern wilds. Forests warped by radiation. Storms. And a century of chemical scars. We thought the locals had gone underground. It was supposed to be cleanup. He paused. And in that silence, something shifted in the chamber. Stillness. We moved in formation. 4 mechs, 12 troopers, top-tier sensors. By hour 3. Our audio feeds went static. Then the drones started showing up. He looked upward. Beyond the thrones, beyond their pride, drones, hung from trees by wires, helmets crushed, into the shape of skulls, no bodies, not a single one. A few counselors shifted, slightly. One rookie puked in his mask. Took it off. Dart hit him in the eye, dead in 10 seconds. They were watching us. The whole time. Visor waved a hand. Dismissive. A primitive ambush, your mistake. No, Varkin snapped. That was just their greeting. He stepped closer to the center. The lights flickered above him. Shadows jagged and sharp. We split up, to flank them. We thought we were clever. Thought we were the predators. One by one, they pulled us into the trees. You wouldn't hear them. You'd just find the blood. I didn't see one, not a single one. Until I was the last one breathing. I shot at shadows for hours. Thermal targeting. Enhanced vision, nothing. They were covered in mud, cloaked against our systems, perfectly still, perfectly silent. And then they waited. Until my power cells were dry, until I had no strength left. Then they surrounded me. The chamber stopped mocking, it listened. One stepped forward. Armor mismatched, one lens cracked. A rifle older than my birth cycle. He didn't flinch, he didn't speak. A younger counselor whispered, "What did he do?" Varkin looked. Straight at Visa's weapon, then lowered it. He looked me in the eyes and said, "You're not worth the bullet." The words echoed across the council chamber. Like a curse, Visor chuckled. "And that broke you?" Varkin's voice turned to steel. It wasn't mercy. It was dismissal. He wanted me to remember. And I have, every day. The archspeaker leaned in. You were brought here for evidence. You bring only superstition. I bring survival, Varkin hissed. Visor rose, regal, radiant. I've seen the projections. Earth's weapons are primitive. Their factions divided. Once we land, it'll be over in days. You haven't fought them, Varkin said quietly. You've only read about them. Numbers don't account for madness. They thrive in chaos. They'll let you in on the first day, just to make you feel safe. His voice dropped. Then they'll come. In the rain, when your men are tired, when your coms fail, Vizor's tone sharpened. This isn't your war anymore, fossil. Varkin stared at him, eyes hollow. Then may your fleet burn bright, because it will be the last light you see. The Archspeaker slammed his staff. This council finds no actionable threat. Operation Ironvine proceeds. Guards approached. Varkin didn't resist, but as he was led away, he turned one last time toward the Chamber of Empires and Monsters. They won't fight you for glory or territory, because you made them bury their dead again. And that's when they stopped being soldiers. Vizor smirked. And became what? Varkin said nothing, but in the silence that followed, the galaxy shivered. They thought they were walking into a jungle. They didn't know they were walking into a grave, not one that was dug. One that was waiting. The Hun expanse was no longer Earth's forest. It had changed, become something else. Twisted trees leaned inward like judges, their bark blackened by centuries of chemical rain. Roots spread through the muck like veins under burned skin. The air shimmered, not with heat, with old radiation. With storms that once melted steel, fog curled low. Not the kind that drifts, the kind that watches. Sergeant Mason Trigg crouched beside a dead oak. The bark cracked beneath his gloved hand. His eyes swept the mist, cold. Calculating. Behind him, Private Ellison twitched. Too loud, too young. Trigg tapped 2 fingers on his thigh. Still. The kid froze. Like prey, a head movement. 4 armored figures cut through the haze. Imperial formation. Boots sinking into sludge that didn't let go. Too clean, too confident, too unprepared. One held a drone on a leash. Its scanner flickered, static, twitching. Even the machine knew something was wrong. Trigg whispered, "Vix, you see this?" A breath returned. 4 targets. 1 drone. Bait? Negative, Trigg muttered. Let them walk. Woods eat better when they're hungry. He stayed still. Every nerve wanted to move. But patience, that was the weapon now. The Empire trusted tech. Speed. Numbers. But here, that nothing. Here. The trees remembered. The shadows hunted. And every sound had teeth. The patrol reached the clearing. Then it began. Snap. Not a branch. A tension cable. The lead soldier vanished, ripped 10 meters into the canopy. His scream ended in the leaves. Panic. Instant and raw. Weapons raised. The drone spun wildly, blinded by Earth's pulse. Go, Trigg whispered. His squad moved like breath, like smoke. Ellison slid behind a fern. 2 clean shots, to the thigh. Drop, not kill. Let him feel it. Vix emerged from the fog, silent, blade glinting once. Buried deep under the 3rd soldier's collar, the last one ran. Right into the mist. They didn't chase. They never chased. Trigg stepped into the clearing, the 1st soldier still hanging, gasping, armor folded inward like crushed bone, alive, barely. Trigg crouched beside him. You shouldn't have come here. The soldier choked. Who are you? Trigg's eyes never blinked. Ghosts, he said. Just ghosts. He cut the rope. Let the body fall. Didn't bury it. Didn't hide it. Left it there. So they'd find it. By nightfall, the squad was hidden. Beneath synth leaves, camo netting, and Earth's silence. A small fire burned low. Protein stew boiled under a blackened pot. Steam curled like secrets. Trigg sat alone, sharpening a blade older than half the solar system. Old tools always worked better in new wars. Ellison finally asked, why don't we just wipe them out? Trigg didn't look up, because they haven't learned yet. Vic stirred the pot. He means fear takes time. Ellison muttered, they fear death, same as us. Trigg stopped sharpening. No, they fear what they don't understand. He leaned forward. Right now they think this is resistance. Just locals causing trouble. But when they start losing and can't explain why, he looked up. Eyes hollow. That's when it breaks them. Vix handed out bowls. Her gaze shifted north. Admiral's fleet landed. 2 clicks. Heavy mechs. Plasma walkers. Ellison froze. That's not good. Trigg sipped his stew. Calm. Good. The kid blinked. Wait, what? Trigg didn't answer. He reached into his coat, pulled out a small tin, opened it. Inside, a torn paper. Names. Dozens. He wrote one more. Girl from the ridge. He closed the tin. Slowly. They send us fleets. He paused. We send them memories. And as the fog wrapped around their fire, as shapes moved in places nothing should move, and as distant screams echoed through the trees, Trig smiled. For the first time, because the Empire had set foot on Earth, and Earth never forgave trespassers. You can't fight what you can't see. You can't kill what's already a memory. And in the Hun expanse, memory is the deadliest weapon of all. The Empire responded like it always had. With numbers, with firepower, with confidence. They sent in heavier patrols, scouts, walkers, sensor drones trailing behind like leashed hounds. Commanders barked orders, as if their voices still meant something out here, but the jungle didn't care. And neither did its ghosts. Trig watched from the trees, his face streaked with ash. And silence. Beside him, Vix adjusted signal dampeners buried beneath the leaves. Not that the Empire's tech was working. Earth had already taught it to lie. 5-man. Patrol, East Edge, Vix whispered. No drones this time. Just nerves. Trig didn't blink. They're learning. A pause, but not fast enough. They didn't engage. Not directly. That wasn't the point. Instead, they left things behind. A crushed Imperial helmet, hanging from a branch. The wrong nameplate welded to it. A name from the roster, still alive. A child's laugh recorded at a refugee camp. Played over. Static at the edge of a comms relay. An Imperial flag, torn, hung upside down, soaked in something that smelled like blood. Each one whispered the same message. We see you. We know you. We remember everything. One rookie stumbled back to base, screaming, swearing he saw his brother. Problem was, his brother had died 3 years ago. On a different planet. Another snapped when he found his own face, carved into the bark of a tree. He'd never removed his helmet. Not once. At night, Vix moved alone. She slipped through the grass like breath. No sound, no trail, nothing left behind. Except 3 recorders, each one played a voice. Not hers. Not Trig's. Not human. The voice of their own admiral, lifted. From a private briefing just days earlier. Primitive species. Emotionally driven, tactically inferior. That voice now echoed from helmet to helmet, not as a command. As mockery. Far away, deep inside a compound, they kept a prisoner. Girl. 14, maybe? They hadn't restrained her. They didn't need to. She just sat there. Still, empty-eyed, like something far older, was sitting behind those eyes. Admiral Visor entered. No helmet. Posture tight. You speak basic? She nodded. Name? No reply. He knelt. You know why? You're here? She looked at him. For the first time, her voice was hoarse, but steady. You're here because you don't listen. Visor's eyes narrowed. You killed my men. Her answer came cold. I didn't need to. Back in the forest. Trig sat near a fire that barely breathed. Ellison watched the embers like they were counting down. Why don't we just wipe them all out? The kid's voice was thin. Trig didn't look up. Because they haven't broken yet. They're scared, Ellison said. Trig's eyes stayed on the dark. They're scared of death, but they're not afraid of us yet. Vix stirred. The pot. Fear takes time. Trig stood. Reached into his coat. The tin opened with a soft snap. Inside names faded. Folded. He added another. Lieutenant from the ridge. Folded it shut. They send us fleets, he said. We send them memory. Back at the forward base, alarms. Not for weapons. For sound. A signal cut through every frequency. Low, distorted, impossible to trace. Then a voice. Varkin. This is Commander Varkin. I speak not as a traitor, but as your only hope of understanding. His tone was calm, measured. You believed Earth was weak, that its chaos was its downfall. But it's not chaos. It's instinct, and it's old. Older than your fleet. Older than your pride. You thought this was war. It's not. It's what comes after. What soldiers become when you teach them only to survive. Then silence. Then the fog returned. Trig stood at the jungle's edge, watching the empires. Lights flicker like dying stars. Vix stepped beside him. They heard it. Trig nodded. They were supposed to. Vix's voice was quiet. What now? Trig stared ahead, flat, unmoving. Now we teach them what ghosts really are. He came down in gold-plated armor, because he still thought this was a war, but the jungle, it was a funeral. And his name was already carved into the dirt. The drop shuttle hit Earth like a sledgehammer. Ash kicked up in waves. Smoke curled from the soil like breath from an open wound. Admiral CRE's visor stepped into the haze, white and gold armor radiant, gleaming like a lie under a dying sky. The troops didn't cheer. They didn't salute. They just watched. Eyes hollow. Hands trembling. Fingers clamped to weapons like lifelines. This wasn't leadership. This was denial with boots. The forward base was barely standing. Barricades had collapsed. Cables hung like vines. Sensor towers flickered and looped. Soldiers paced, like inmates, whispering, avoiding their own reflections in shattered glass. Vezero walked the ruins with a stare that didn't blink. Captain Loro met him with a rigid salute. Admiral. We weren't expecting. Visa raised a hand. Obviously, he stepped over a broken barricade. Didn't flinch at the rot in the air. What happened? Loro hesitated. We lost. Everything but the ground. Inside the command tent, screens flickered. Maps glitched. Audio feeds repeated. Static like it was gospel. Red zones spread across every region. Drones disappeared off the grid. Scans returned blank. They move without heat signatures, Loro said. No tracks, no trace. 4 squads gone in places we cleared the day before. VZOUR leaned over the holotable. The enemy markers had changed. No coordinates. No symbols. Just question marks. Everywhere. What is this? Loro exhaled. Where we think they are. You're guessing, Visa growled. Loro didn't blink. We're surviving. On the far side of the compound, she waited. The girl, not bound, not drugged. Just still. 4 guards circled her like dogs around a flame. Not one looked her in the eye. Visa approached, helmet under one arm. His face was stone. You speak? A single nod. Name? Nothing. He crouched lower. Slower this time? You know why you're here? Still silence. He tried again. Softer. We're losing good men. We don't know why. She finally looked at him. Eyes cold, still, ageless. Losing, she said, because you don't listen. His jaw clenched. You've killed my men. She tilted her head. I didn't need to. He leaned closer. What are you? Her voice was a whisper. You haven't figured it out yet? A pause. Then, he's coming out in the jungle. Trig moved like he was part of the trees. Alone now. Exactly as planned. Vix was laying tripwires in the west. Ellison was corrupting the last working drone hub. And Trig walked the edge. Tonight wasn't about killing. It was about reminding. He reached a ridge above the base. Took out a small black speaker. Set it down in the dirt. Pressed play. Across the base. Voices woke the ghosts. In helmets. Radios. Abandoned. Relay towers. A voice echoed. Familiar. VZ. His own words. Spoken weeks ago. Primitive species. Emotionally fragile. Tactical inferiors. Again. And again. And again. The soldiers froze. Every one of them had heard that voice before. Not from their commander, from the branches. Where helmets swung like wind chimes. Inside the tent, Vizur's eyes narrowed. Shut it down, Captain Loro paled. We can't. It's not coming from here. The signal's bouncing. Vizur pushed past the canvas flaps. The fog was heavier now, moving, watching. He spoke without turning. Scramble flamethrower units. Flatten the tree line. I want this jungle erased. Loro hesitated. But, Admiral. The terrain, Vizur's voice cut like a blade. I'm not commanding from orbit while our fleet gets carved apart by cave-dwelling ghosts. He paused. Looked toward the trees. I'm going out myself. That night, the fog came back. Thicker than ever. Lights failed. Maps went blank, and every soldier began to wonder if they were still awake or already lost. Beyond the wire, Trig crouched beside a dying ember. He didn't smile. Didn't speak loudly. He whispered. Let him hear his own words. Let him hear why we're still alive. The war hadn't begun. Not yet. But the jungle was listening, and the jungle never forgot. They had numbers. They had machines, but Earth had names. And the dead never stopped speaking. The fog arrived before the fear. Low, heavy, alive. It moved through trenches like breath from something. Buried, soundless, cold, suffocating. Inside the ruins of Sector 9, no soldier slept. No one dared. They sat near failing heaters and cracked comms, rifles across their laps, eyes wide, breath shallow. The silence was too perfect, too still, too much like breathing. Trig moved through it like shadow folded inside shadow. No light touched him. No sound followed. He passed 2 guards, both upright, both still, unconscious. Neurotoxin in their water had done its work hours ago. He reached the steps of the old command tower. Kneeling slow, deliberate, from his coat, a black box. Worn, small, deadly. Not a bomb. A recorder. He pressed play. Voice spoke, calm, steady. Sergeant Alan Broth. Private Kira Dallas. Commander Eric DeVale. 1 by 1. It listed the names. No music. No tone. Just memory. Sharpened into sound. Names the Empire buried. Names it forgot. Names that remembered themselves. By 0300 hours. Sector 9 was no longer a military post. It had become a graveyard without headstones. Some soldiers sat frozen, eyes vacant, weapons untouched. Others whispered names they didn't remember knowing. Lieutenant wept into a photo of someone who never existed. A private walked barefoot into the fog, murmuring the same words again and again. They know us. They've always known us. Admiral Visor awoke hard. Bolt upright, heart pounding. This wasn't a dream. The voices weren't in his head. They were everywhere. Outside, inside, in the walls of his tent. In the comms, in the air. He stepped outside. The cold hit hard. The soldiers were scattered, standing, kneeling, some praying, some shaking. A private sobbed. Blood on his hands, eyes wide. I heard my mother, he said. She's dead. 10 years now. She was singing to me. Visor followed the sound. To the base of the tower. There it was. The black box, still whispering. Captain Hernv. Sub-Marshal Parnalox. Corporal Thrin Gale. He crushed. It underfoot. Silence. Then, another voice from the mess tent. Another from the crates. Another from the barracks. Dozens of them. All playing. All remembering. Then the signal came. Low frequency. Untraceable. Varkin's voice. Not live. Not a call. A message. Timed. Prepared. This is Varkin, former commander, 13th Imperial Division. I speak not as a traitor, but as your last chance to listen. You thought this was war. It's not. This is memory. This is pain, sharpened. You didn't fight humans. You made them bury their dead. And that's when they stopped being soldiers. That's when they became something else. Captain Loro burst into the command tent. Sir, we've lost containment. Visor's jaw locked. Define containment. Loro didn't blink. 4 squads walked into the fog. No orders, no gear. They said they were going to find the dead. 2 more sat down. Didn't speak, just gave up. Outside, the name list kept going. Soft, steady. A grief too sharp to shut out. Visor spoke quietly. Recall everyone. All sectors. All units. We're leaving. Loro hesitated. But Admiral, we still hold strategic. Visor's voice cut through. We don't hold anything. We were never in control. Far above the planet, in the shadows of Earth's orbit, a stolen diplomatic vessel hovered silent. Inside it, Varkin stood alone. His face lit only by a dim com panel. He watched the last Imperial carriers turn away, leaving Earth behind. He raised the mic. One last time. This is not a victory transmission. Earth has not won. There was no battle to win. The Empire simply learned, too late, what it had provoked. Humanity did not rise, it endured. And when the fire came again, it did not scream. It remembered. Let this be archived. Let it be repeated. When you speak of Deathworlds, speak softly. Back on Earth, Trig stood at the jungle's edge. A voice still echoed through the trees. One last name. He didn't speak. Didn't move. Didn't smile. He just listened. Because that night, Earth didn't fight. It remembered. and the Empire finally understood what memory could do. No shots fired, no bombs dropped, but when morning came, an army was already lost. Dawn should have brought clarity, but Sector 9 looked like something the sun had abandoned. No banners, no orders, just fog thick as cement draped across. Broken tents and dying perimeter lights. It moved like it knew where the fear was. Low, crawling, certain. This wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was a mausoleum. Waiting for its final name, Trig moved through the ruins, silent, alone, unarmed. No team. No voice in his ear. Just memory and purpose. His boots avoided every wire, every crack, every scattered ration pack. This wasn't infiltration. It was completion. He reached the base of the comms tower, knelt, careful, precise, pulled a black box from his coat, placed it on the step, pressed play. The voice began, steady, clear, unchanged. Private Len Garris, Lieutenant Shore Dolan, Medic Rivenstar. Each name drifted into the fog like smoke from a fire no one had seen. No music, no rage, just memory, spoken like prayer. But this time, there was no panic. No shouts, no screams, because the soldiers weren't hearing the names anymore, they were feeling them. One platoon walked into the forest. No orders, no helmets. Just a calm like they were going home. Another sat in silence, eyes closed, mouths moving, names whispered that didn't belong to them. Or maybe they did. In the medbay, a young private took his own blood and wrote names onto his blanket. No message, no symbol. Just a list. No one stopped him. No one moved. Admiral Villa stood on the command platform, motionless, weightless. He had once led fleets, broken worlds, wielded the future like a blade. Now, he couldn't get one man to lift a rifle. He heard his own words playing back. Primitive species. Emotionally fragile. Once they made him feel powerful. Now. They echoed from helmets, from branches, from the dirt itself. He didn't know who the enemy was anymore. There were no bodies. No weapons. Just grief. Sharpened like glass. Captain Loro entered the tent. Eyes blank. Voice flat. We've lost contact with every patrol west of the ravine. Visor said nothing. They're not dead, Loro added. They're just gone. He paused. We found 12 helmets, arranged in a circle, each one engraved with names from our own casualty list. Visor's voice cracked. They know our dead. Loro nodded, quiet, barely breathing. We're not fighting soldiers anymore. Visor turned. For the first time in hours. No, he said, we're fighting what soldiers become when you leave them with nothing but pain. That night, Trig returned. The guards were unconscious, again, but this time, there was no resistance. No alert. No care. He walked across the courtyard like a ghost returning to its grave. At the steps of the command center, he placed another box. Then one near the mess tent, then the barracks, then the medbay. 12 in total. Each one unique, each one a name list. No duplicates, because the Empire was going to remember every single one. At 0300 hours, the voices returned, not as threats, not as screams. Just names. Endless, weightless, impossible to silence. Visera walked into the open, bareheaded, unarmed, alone. The fog kissed his armor. The wind carried names. He knelt in front of the steps, lifted one recorder. It whispered, Captain Varian, Lieutenant Nor, Ensign Relia. He crushed it. Another voice started, from the drop bay. Another from the mess tent. Another from inside his own quarters. By morning, Virgir faced Loro again. His voice was hollow, a whisper emptied of pride. We leave, Loro blinked. Sir? All units, all sectors, now? But Visor didn't raise his tone. We never fought them, he said. We fought what we made them become. Above them, the fog shifted. Earth listened. Because victory was not declared. It was remembered. And Earth remembers everything. There was no battle, no flags, no surrender. Just silence. And the wind, whispering through names carved into trees. Trig walked through the bones of Sector 9. His steps were slow, deliberate, not from fatigue. But because, for the first time, the war had gone quiet. Ash floated in the morning light. No sirens, no boots. Just wind. Just stillness. Above him. The last of the Empire's fleet rose through the clouds like smoke from a fire that had already burned itself out. They didn't run, didn't retreat, didn't surrender. They just left, because there was nothing left to conquer. Only everything to remember. Trig carried no weapon. Just a worn satchel across his chest. Inside, dog tags, a folded list, and silence. He reached the old tree at the jungle's edge. The place where it had all begun, where the first warning was carved in blood. The bark had cracked from storms and time, but it still stood. Like the ghosts it kept. He opened the satchel, unfolded the paper. Carefully, like a sacred thing, hundreds of names. Each one written by hand, some faded, some torn, all remembered. He looked at the bottom, one space left. Still blank. He held the pen, paused. Then put it away. He didn't write it. His name didn't belong there. Because Earth didn't honor victories. It honored grief. He folded the paper again, slid it gently into the split bark, pressed it in like tucking something in for sleep, then stepped back. Quiet. Still. Far above, in the dark of Earth's orbit, Varkin stood alone. No screens. No words. He had sent the final message. Not a warning. Not a command. Just truth. There was no reply. There didn't need to be. The Empire finally understood. This was never about conquest. It was always about memory. Below, the jungle breathed again. No traps. No voices. No weapons. Only fog. Weaving through the ruins of machines and shattered helmets. A grave made not from rage, but from waiting. Earth had not risen. It had endured. That was always the difference. Trig sat beneath the tree, the one now holding the names. His hands rested on his knees, his face calm. He didn't close his eyes, didn't speak, didn't move. He just looked up at a sky that had once promised stars, and now held only silence. There were no more names to write, no more orders to give, nothing left to say. Just a planet that had never been tamed. Final voiceover begins. You thought Earth was weak. You thought grief made it soft, made it fragile, but you were wrong. Grief made it patient, and memory made it deadly. Final fade to black. Last words. The last light you saw wasn't victory. It was remembrance. And Earth never forgets.